The shocking case of Junko Furuta, Japanese high school student brutally tortured and murdered in 1988, remains one of Japan's most heinous crimes. Decades later, this tragedy continues to haunt the collective conscience, not just for its cruelty, but also due to the controversial leniency shown towards her assailants. Recently, the resurfacing of one of the perpetrators on social media has reignited public outrage and debate, bringing this harrowing story back into the limelight. The video delves into the details of the case, aftermath, and the societal and judicial responses that still provoke intense discussion and demand reflection. Background of the case. The case of Junko Furuta, a tragedy that unfolded in the late 1980s, stands as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the flaws in the justice system. A young student's life was tragically disrupted, leading to a case that has since drawn considerable attention for its impact and implication, marking the beginning of an ordeal that would later be recognized as one of the most gruesome episodes in the annals of Japanese crime. On that fateful day, Junko was cycling home from her part-time job, unaware that she was being targeted by a group of teenage boys led by Hiroshi Miyano. The boys had a sinister plan in place, which began with Nobuharu Minato intentionally striking Junko with his motorcycle. This orchestrated collision was meant to serve as a pretext for Miyano, who appeared as a savior to rescue her. And Junko, unsuspecting of their ploy, was then deceitfully led away under the guise of safety. The ordeal that Junko endured over the next 44 days in the captivity of these youths is harrowing and deeply unsettling. Held in the house owned by the parents of one of the assailant, Junko was subjected to unspeakable acts of torture and abuse. The details of the atrocities committed against her paint a picture of unrelenting brutality. The perpetrators, emboldened by a lack of parental intervention and their affiliations with Yakuza, Japan's organized crime syndicate, escalated their violence with alarming intensity. Reports indicate that the case involves severe physical maltreatment, highlighting the need for greater awareness and action against such abuses. Psychological torment was equally severe, as Junko was forced to pretend to be the girlfriend of one of her captors to avoid police suspicion. She was also coerced into calling her own family to assure them that she was safe and staying with friends, a ruse that delayed her rescue. As days turned into weeks, the situation grew increasingly dire. The severity of her injuries, combined with malnutrition and neglect, left Junko in a state of extreme physical and mental distress. As the captors, losing interest in their victim, grew more reckless, eventually leading to Junko's tragic death on January 4th, 1989. The tragic conclusion of this case and the attempts to conceal the wrongdoing have prompted widespread discussion on legal and ethical issues. As the discovery of Junko's body in a concrete-filled drum in March 1989 brought the grim reality of her ordeal to light. The Japanese public, upon learning of the details, was horrified and outraged. The case not only exposed the extreme brutality of the perpetrators, but also highlighted several systemic failures, including the lack of parental oversight and the apparent ineffectiveness of law enforcement in dealing with juvenile crime. The trial of the four main perpetrators, Hiroshi Miyano, Nobuharu Minato Kamisaku, previously known as Jotaro Ogura, and Yasushi Watanabe, began amidst a backdrop of public outcry and media frenzy.
The leniency of the Japanese juvenile law at the time meant that despite the severity of their crimes, the assailants were tried as minors.
This aspect of the case further fueled public debate and criticism, as many felt that the sentences handed down were grossly inadequate, given the nature of their crime. The Junko Furuta case is more than a narrative of a heinous crime. It is a mirror reflecting the societal and legal shortcomings in addressing juvenile delinquency and the handling of serious crimes committed by minors. The public's response to the case, characterized by a mix of grief and disbelief, underlines the lasting impact of Junko's story on Japanese society. It raised questions about the nature of justice and the extent to which a legal system can and should be responsible for rehabilitating young offenders. Crime: a detailed account. The crime against Junko Furuta occurred over 44 days from November 1988 to January 1989. Stands as one of the most harrowing and horrific episodes in the annals of criminal history. This detailed account aims to provide an understanding of the events, though it is important to approach the subject with sensitivity due to the extreme nature of the violence involved. Junko Furuta, a 17-year-old high school student, was abducted on November 25, 1988 by Hiroshi Miyano and his associates Nobuharu Minato Kamisaku, previously known as Jotaro Ogura, Yasushi Wannabe. These individuals were teenagers themselves, making the crime even more shocking. The abduction was premeditated. Mio had been fixated on Furuta and devised a plan to kidnap her. But once abducted, Furuta was taken to a house in the Ayase district of Adachi, Tokyo, which belonged to Matt's parents. Here she was subjected to unspeakable acts of brutality that lasted for several weeks. The details of the torture she endured are difficult to comprehend and represent a complete abandonment of humanity by her captors. The abuse included repeated and severe physical violence. Furuta was beaten with various objects including metal rods, golf clubs, and bamboo sticks. But she was subjected to numerous forms of torture, such as being hung from the ceiling and used as a punching bag where her assailant would take turns assaulting her. The severity of the mistreatment resulted in significant injuries, with the case also bringing to light other serious allegations of misconduct. She was repeatedly raped by Miyano Minato Yura Watanabe and allegedly by other associates from their Yakuza connections. This continuous sexual assault represented a gross violation of her dignity and bodily integrity. The investigation and arrest. The investigation into the abduction and murder of Junko Furuta stands as a grim chapter in the annals of Japanese criminal justice. That the path to uncovering the truth behind her disappearance and the subsequent arrest of her assailants was marred by missed opportunity, ID's oversights, and a delayed response reflecting the systemic and societal challenges in addressing such a heinous crime. Initially, Junko's disappearance did not trigger an immediate investigation, primarily because she was able to call her parents and falsely reassure them that she was staying with a friend. This crucial maneuver by the perpetrators effectively misled her family and delayed the filing of a missing person report. It wasn't until her prolonged absence raised alarms that the search for Junko began in earnest. As the investigation unfolded, the initial lack of leads and evidence posed significant challenges. The local police faced a daunting task: a missing teenager with no apparent clues pointing to her whereabouts or the circumstances of her disappearance. Meanwhile, Junko was enduring unimaginable torture just a short distance from her own home, hidden in plain sight in a residential area. The breakthrough in the case came about somewhat inadvertently. The very audacity and recklessness of the perpetrators led to their undoing. In late January 1989, Hiroshi Miyano and Jorura, emboldened by their apparent success in evading capture for Junko's abduction, committed a separate assault and rape. This criminal act, unrelated to Junko's case, was what eventually led to their arrest. Upon being apprehended for this crime, the police interrogation revealed inconsistencies and suspicious behavior that prompted further probing. During the interrogation, Miyano, under the pressure of persistent questioning by the detectives, cracked. He confessed to the abduction of Junko Furuta, revealing the horrifying details of her captivity and torture. A crucial confession in the investigation provided key insights, shedding light on the broader aspects of the case and those involved Nobuharu Minato Kamisaku, previously known as Jotaro Yura and Yasushi Watanabe. Following Mio's confession, the police swiftly moved to arrest the other three individuals involved in the crime. The evidence against them was overwhelming, built on Miyano's detailed confession and corroborated by the physical evidence gathered from the Minato household, where the majority of the torture had taken place. The discovery of Junko's body in a concrete drum further solidified the case against the perpetrators. The autopsy results were damning, revealing the extent of the physical and sexual abuse she had endured over her 44-day captivity. This evidence, coupled with the confessions and testimonies, painted a clear picture of the sequence of events and the roles each individual played in the crime. Action to the arrests and the details of the crime was one of shock and outrage. The Japanese public, upon learning of the depravity and brutality of the acts committed against Junko, called for swift and severe justice. The case raised serious questions about juvenile crime and the effectiveness of the Japanese legal system in dealing with such extreme acts of violence, especially committed by minors. The handling of the investigation in retrospect highlighted several critical issues. There was criticism over the initial response to Junko's disappearance and the failure to quickly identify the severity of her situation. Additionally, the fact that the perpetrators were able to commit such a crime under the nose of authority figures including parents and police, pointed to a broader societal problem in addressing and preventing juvenile delinquency. Trial and sentencing. The trial of the perpetrators in the Junko Furuta case was a focal point of national attention in Japan, highlighting not only the barbarity of the crime but also the limitations and controversies surrounding the Japanese juvenile justice system. The public, already shocked and horrified by the details of the crime, watched closely as the judicial process unfolded. The four main perpetrators, Hiroshi Miyano, Nobuharu Minato Kamisaku, previously known as Jotaro Gura, and Yasushi Watanabe, paid trial in the Tokyo District Court. Given the nature of the crime and the ages of the defendants, who were all juveniles at the time of the crime, the trial was subject to the provisions of Japan's juvenile law. As this aspect of the legal proceedings would later become a point of significant public contention, Neno, identified as the ringleader, was initially charged with the abduction and murder of Furuta. This confession, along with the overwhelming evidence against him, painted a damning picture. However, the charges he faced were somewhat mitigated by his status as a minor. In Japan, the law often seeks to rehabilitate rather than strictly punish juvenile offenders, a philosophy that significantly influenced the sentencing. In this case, the trial proceedings revealed in excruciating detail the extent of the torture and abuse inflicted upon Junko. The testimonies and evidence presented were harrowing, evoking strong emotions both in the courtroom and among the general public. The defendants' lack of remorse and the heinous nature of their actions only intensified the public's demand for justice. July 1990, the verdicts were handed down. Hiroshi Miyano, ringleader, received a 20-year sentence, the maximum term available for a minor under Japanese law at the time. Nobuharu Minato, who had provided the location for the crime, received a 5 to 9-year sentence. Kamisaku, who had played a significant role in the torture, received an 8-year sentence. Yasushi Watanabe, who was deemed less culpable than the others, was sentenced to a term of 3-4 years. And the sentences immediately sparked outrage across Japan. Many felt that the punishment did not fit the severity of the crime. Considering the brutal and prolonged nature of the abuse, critics of the verdict pointed to the leniency of the juvenile justice system and argued for harsher penalties for such heinous crimes, even when committed by minors. And a debate brought to the fore the tension between the principles of rehabilitation and the public's desire for retribution in cases of extreme violence. The case also raised questions about the role of the parents of the perpetrators, particularly Minato's parents, who were aware of the crime but did not intervene. This aspect of the case highlighted the need for greater parental responsibility and accountability in preventing and reporting such crimes. Furthermore, the trial brought attention to the broader issue of how society deals with juvenile delinquency. The public discourse that followed questioned whether the existing legal frameworks were adequate in addressing crimes of such magnitude committed by youth. They led to calls for reforms in the juvenile justice system, including the consideration of the nature of the crime and the age of the offender in sentencing decisions. The aftermath and impact on Japanese society, with its disturbing details and contentious trial outcomes, had profound and lasting effects on Japanese society, its legal system, and the media landscape. This case not only triggered an outpouring of grief and anger, but also sparked a critical re-evaluation of juvenile justice and the role of media in reporting such crimes. In the immediate aftermath, there was a palpable sense of shock and disbelief across Japan. The brutality of the crime, combined with the perceived leniency of the sentences, led to widespread public outcry. This case challenged the societal perception of youth crime and highlighted the inadequacies in the way the legal system dealt with violent juvenile offenders. There was a strong sentiment that the justice system, in its effort to rehabilitate young offenders, had failed to adequately punish and deter such heinous acts, and the public response to the case led to calls for legal reforms. Advocates argued for stricter punishments for severe crimes committed by minors and for the reconsideration of laws governing juvenile offenders. The debate extended into the higher echelons of the Japanese government, with discussions about revising the juvenile law and the penal code to address the gaps exposed by their case. These discussions were indicative of a broader societal shift towards a more punitive approach in dealing with serious juvenile crimes. The Furuta case also had a significant impact on the media and its approach to crime reporting. The extensive coverage of the trial and the graphic nature of the crime raised questions about the ethical limits of reporting and the media's responsibility towards its audience. The case became a point of reference for discussions on media sensationalism and the balance between public interest and respect for the dignity of victims and their families. Moreover, the case had an unsettling effect on the collective Japanese psyche, and it shattered the prevailing sense of safety and trust within communities, highlighting the potential dangers lurking within seemingly normal settings. The fact that the crime was committed by teenagers in a residential area and under the noses of adults raised uncomfortable questions about societal values, parenting, and community vigilance. The educational system, too, felt the reverberations of the case. As schools and educators faced scrutiny regarding their role in shaping the moral and ethical values of young people. The case underscored the need for more robust character education and the importance of teaching empathy and respect for human life. The case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films reflecting the deep scar it left on the national consciousness. These works often examine not just the crime itself, but also the societal conditions that allowed such a tragedy to occur, as serve as a somber reminder of the case and its lessons, ensuring that the memory of Junko Furuta and the issues her story raised remain part of the public discourse. The case also led to a greater awareness and discussion around the issues of child abuse and domestic violence. It highlighted the need for strong protective measures for children and more effective intervention strategies in cases of domestic abuse. This heightened awareness has contributed to more proactive efforts in safeguarding children and ensuring their welfare. The years following the Furuta case, Japanese society has continued to grapple with its implications. While some legal reforms have been enacted, the debate over the balance between rehabilitation and punishment in juvenile justice persists. The case remains a touchstone in discussions about the nature of evil, the capacity for redemption, and the role of society in preventing such tragedies. Recent developments in public outrage. The Junko Furuta case, a harrowing saga of brutality that had seemingly concluded with the sentencing of her assailants, resurfaced into public consciousness decades later, triggering a renewed wave of outrage. This resurgence was primarily fueled by the discovery of one of the killer's active presence on social media, a revelation that reopened old wounds and questioned the efficacy of the justice system. The reemergence of the case into the public eye began when Nobuharu Minato, one of the perpetrators, was identified on social media. Minato, who had served his sentence and was released, had been living under an assumed identity. The discovery of his online presence, where he was reportedly living a normal, unrestricted life, incited a strong and immediate backlash from the public. This reaction was not just due to his past actions, but was compounded by the perception that he showed little remorse for his role in the crime. The public's reaction to Mato's social media presence was a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. Many felt that his ability to participate in society, seemingly unencumbered by his past, was a gross miscarriage of justice. This sentiment was especially strong among those who believed that the sentences handed down to Furuta's killers were too lenient, given the severity of their crimes. The outrage was amplified by the content of Minato's posts, which many found to be insensitive and indicative of a lack of remorse. The juxtaposition of his current freedom with the horrific fate of Junko Furuta intensified feelings of injustice and sparked a broader discussion about the rehabilitation of criminals and their reintegration into society. The public debate centered around whether individuals who commit such heinous acts can truly be rehabilitated, and if so, what measures should be in place to ensure they do not pose a threat to society. A reaction on social media was swift and severe, with many users expressing their disgust and anger. This online movement was not limited to expressions of outrage, it also included calls for action. As some advocated for changes in the law to prevent similar situations in the future, while others went as far as to suggest vigilante justice against Minato. The intensity of the public's response underscored the deep emotional impact the case had on Japanese society. The situation also raised questions about the role of social media in modern society. The platform that enabled Minato to maintain a public profile also became a vehicle for public scrutiny and outrage. It highlighted the challenges of monitoring and regulating the online activities of individuals with criminal histories, particularly those was involved in high-profile cases. This renewed interest in the case also led to a re-evaluation of the effectiveness of Japan's criminal justice system, particularly in dealing with juvenile offenders. The fact that Minato was able to reintegrate into society without significant public awareness or oversight was seen by many as a failure of the system to protect the community and honor the memory of the victim. In response to the public outcry, there were calls for increased transparency in the criminal justice process, particularly in cases involving violent crimes. There was also a push for more stringent monitoring and restrictions on individuals released after serving sentences for serious crimes to prevent them from causing further harm or distress to the community. The media coverage of these developments played a significant role in shaping public opinion. The case was extensively covered in newspapers, television, and online platforms, often with a focus on the emotional aspects of the story. This coverage contributed to the heightened public response and brought the case back into the national discourse. Reflections on justice and societal response. The Junko Furuta case, with its tragic narrative and the subsequent societal response, serves as a profound reflection on the concepts of justice,
the role of
society in response to heinous crimes, and the enduring legacy of the victim. The case transcends the individual story of Furuta to touch upon broader themes of legal justice, societal attitudes, and the collective memory of a nation. At the heart of the reflections on this case is the concept of justice and its application. The sentences mete out to Furuta's assailant sparked a national debate on the adequacy of the Japanese justice system, particularly concerning juvenile offenders. Critics argued that the system's emphasis on rehabilitation over punishment, especially for minors, failed to provide a sense of justice to the victim and society. The leniency shown to the perpetrators was seen as a miscarriage of justice, undermining public confidence in the legal system's ability to deter such crimes and protect the vulnerable. This case also brings into focus the societal response to extreme acts of violence. The public outrage, intensified by the emergence of social media, reflected a collective sense of moral indignation and a demand for accountability. It highlighted the role of society in not only shaping the judicial response to crime, but also in remembering and honoring the victim. The widespread coverage and enduring public interest in the case suggest a collective desire to seek justice and prevent the recurrence of such atrocities. Furthermore, societal response underscored the importance of victim-centered justice. The focus on the perpetrator's rehabilitation and subsequent reintegration into society was seen by many as neglecting the victim's suffering and the lasting impact on her family. And this aspect of the case sparked discussions about the need for a more balanced approach to justice, one that considers the rights and dignity of victims and their families alongside the rehabilitation of offenders. The case also had a significant impact on the media and its role in shaping public discourse. The extensive and often sensational coverage of the crime and the trial brought the case into the national consciousness, influencing public perception and response. While the media played a crucial role in highlighting the case and its implications, it also raised ethical questions about the limits of reporting, particularly in cases involving graphic violence and young offenders. The enduring legacy of Junko Furuta is another critical aspect of the reflections on this case. Her story has become a symbol of the fight against violence and injustice. Memorials, documentaries, books, and online forums dedicated to her memory serve as reminders of the tragedy and the need for vigilance in protecting the innocent. Her legacy has also inspired activism and advocacy for changes in the legal system, particularly regarding the treatment of juvenile offenders and the protection of victims' rights. The case also highlights the broader cultural and societal implications of such crimes. It challenges societal attitudes towards violence, particularly violence perpetrated by youth. The shock and horror elicited by the case prompted introspection about the cultural, familial, and educational factors that could contribute to such behavior in young people. This introspection has led to efforts to strengthen community ties, improve parental guidance, and enhance moral education in schools. In addition, the case has had a lasting impact on the Japanese legal system. The public outcry and debate it sparked have led to discussions and some reforms aimed at addressing the shortcomings exposed by the case. These reforms include considerations for harsher penalties for serious crimes committed by minors and improvements in the mechanisms for monitoring, reintegrating juvenile offenders into society.